Welcome to Unlearn, where we talk to industry leaders about unlearning how we go to market.
I'm Kelly Sarabin, and I run tech partner enablement and advocacy at HubSpot.
And I'm Asher Matthew, co-founder of Partnership Leaders.
The old ways of going to market are getting more expensive and less effective.
To thrive in an era of digital transformation, you have to go to market differently. Let's find out how. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Unlearn podcast. It's me, Asher, and Kelly, who you all know and love, at least most of us do. I'm just kidding, everybody does. And today we have a super special episode with what I would call one of the legends of the BD industry. And so, Bob, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us. And tell our audience a little bit about who you are, because I think they're in for a treat.
Sure. Hey, yeah, sure. Thank you so much for hosting, and Kelly, wonderful to meet you, and thanks for doing this today. Let's see. When I heard about this organization, I said, this is an organization I need to get to know better, and this podcast is something I was very interested in. So I've been in partnerships for many years. Would it be helpful, Asher, Kelly, if I kind of walk through my background?
Yeah.
Or yeah, so just to introduce myself, so I've been in the startup scene for a while. Actually started my career working in Tokyo at Sony and doing partnership work. I was product manager for internet, kind of on TV. I started this project there back in the late 90s and started coming to Silicon Valley to do licensing deals with startups to license a browser for television. And that was my first taste of kind of technology partnership work. I fell in love with it, came out to Silicon Valley, wanted to start my own company, and then did the obvious thing, which is apply to business school, which you don't really obviously need to do to start a company. And was fortunate, got into Harvard and went out there, started a company in school, and ended up winning the business plan contest back in 2000 at HBS. Raised $10 million from Sequoia and Mark Andreessen and great folks at graduation. Came out here and found myself running a new tech company, which was a lot of fun. Long story short, ended up doing a series of startups. So I did 3 startups. That first one, Bang Networks, where it was kind of my kind of baby, and then 2 more. The second one, which was called OQO. Which was a mobile computing company. And we can certainly dive in more on these. There was a lot of partnership work involved in all of these. And then the third one, which was a company called Quick, which is a mobile video company. Actually, the first kind of live streaming company on mobile. And, I can talk through kind of some of the events that happened in all those companies kind of as a startup. How do you partner with kind of larger organizations, both for kind of critical partnerships that were needed for us to be in business. And then also there were partnerships that we used effectively for distribution. And a lot of people will say that for a startup, you don't need to do partnerships. Like BD is not relevant to startups. And that was certainly not true in these cases. For us, partnerships were really critical. To the extent that when we sold Quick to Skype in the end, so Quick was acquired by Skype for about $150 million, and we became the mobile team at Skype. And they asked me to lead partnerships there because the BD work, the partnerships that we had done at Quick were kind of better than what Skype arguably had been doing despite their brand and scale. So I ended up leading BD there, and actually I think that's when we met. And then that was exciting. And then Skype got acquired. We sold the company to Microsoft for $8.5 billion. So that was an exciting time. And I stayed on at Microsoft for a bit as a GM for a couple of years and led partnerships for the division there. And then I left and went to LinkedIn, which I hope all of you use. Presume everyone spends time on LinkedIn, and
Asher posts at least 7 times a week on LinkedIn, so he's a super user.
I was also one of the earliest users. Also, LinkedIn
is it's kind of I don't even know how we do our jobs without it anymore. But and happy to talk more about any of these experiences in the companies. But so I ended up at LinkedIn as VP of Business Development. and that was part of the product organization, which was really fun. And I can talk also about kind of product and partnerships and how these functions kind of work together in different organizations. But at LinkedIn, it worked really well, kind of being part of the product organization. And then I ended up reporting to Jeff Weiner, who was the CEO, and that was really wonderful experience and kind of formative for me. And LinkedIn as kind of a really mission-driven organization was a really special place to be. Um, and then leading biz dev partnerships there also was fascinating, from scale partnerships. We had 1.7 million websites that we had integrations with, onto some really strategic partnership work that was critical for the company, and some drama with those. And then we even had an API program for developers that I got the opportunity to kind of redefine, in a somewhat controversial way, but to great effect for the ecosystem, I believe. And we even had challenges around scraping that we successfully fought against. So a lot of stuff that happened on LinkedIn. We ended up also getting acquired by Microsoft, just to wrap up the career story. So we sold LinkedIn to Microsoft for 26.2 billion, after being public for quite a while, and then it actually played out very well for, I think, both Microsoft and LinkedIn. So post acquisition, it's really been a success story, which is rare in large transactions like that, where Reed is now on the board, and Kevin is now our former head of engineering at LinkedIn, is CTO at Microsoft, and Ryan, who was one of my colleagues, who's wonderful, is now leading the division as LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's growing, very rapidly, and it's working well. I ended up leaving again, and I went to another company that you may be familiar with, Stripe, a payments company, and I was fortunate to join the leadership team there and lead partnerships and business development. And that was, as you might imagine, a really heady time at Stripe. It's just a fascinating company, and a very ambitious kind of set of people that I had the privilege to work with for a bit. So I did that. And then one of my classmates from business school had started a venture capital firm called DeFi. And he had been at General Catalyst Partners for many years and invited me to join him. And I couldn't refuse. So I'd always wanted to see what it was like on the other side, as it were, having been at startups for so long. And I really had gotten interested in angel investing and working with founders, and wanted to find a way to do that kind of with more impact. So I've been a venture capitalist for the past almost 4 years now. So, but I also still work with lots of folks on partnership activities, and I do some advising stuff for folks on partnerships as well, because that's kind of where my heart is. But maybe with that, happy to.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you're a guitarist as well. Is that what we are seeing in the background?
Well, having guitarist does not make one a guitarist.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I try.
All right, that's great. So, which cafes do you play at these days?
But one of my try to keep things in partnerships land. So one of my friends, Andreas Lieber, who has had a very successful career in partnerships as well. He was at a number of companies, Pinterest and Postmates, and others, and Shippo more recently. And he and I had kind of a band going on, doing 80s covers mostly.
That's amazing.
That's
amazing.
Well, feel free to pop on and give us one of your covers if you want. We can divert
totally.
from the conversation. Expand your audience.
It's a big morning for us in the Rosen household for music, because Taylor Swift's album dropped this morning, and my daughter was riveted. But yeah, we can take it anywhere you guys would like.
Yeah, no, this is great. So one of the things that we want you to dive into is the concept of business development, right? Because and then really understanding how partnerships and business development at the intersection, how they're different. I think you and for the folks who are listening, you, at least in my book, you, Neil Wall, Hito Harmons, Bernie Brenner, like you guys were all in a wave of BD that, and I remember when I was trying to figure out how to go and build a career in biz dev, like you guys were the examples, because you guys were all doing very innovative stuff and very progressive stuff. And since then, we don't hear much about BD, but it's called strategic partnerships now and stuff. But I think it's a very special skill set, right? And even in partnership leaders right now, we have almost 2,000 people, and I think there's 200 of them, or maybe like 250 of them, that can actually go do biz dev, which requires a lot of just broad scale thinking and having a very long term view, versus the channel and alliances stuff that CROs and all the revenue generating side of the house really loves, which does help in the short term, but the long range planning and the long range big bets, excuse me, I believe all come from BD. And so would love to hear how you classify the different types of partnerships, and let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to answer that question. I have a lot of thoughts, as you might imagine. So I guess just to start, I always liked the name business development because it reflects kind of what the goal really is, which is to develop the business, right? And doing partnerships for partnership's sake is not valuable for anybody, and in fact, it can consume a lot of resources. But what I always loved about the function was that it's kind of the place where you can have the creativity between kind of technology and product and business. So it's the way that you can kind of transform the company that you're at, and also and kind of create new businesses, create new business models, figure out what the business is going to be, and kind of develop the business, right? And so that's why I always felt like it's the most fun and interesting role, because you get to touch everything. Ultimately, you get involved in product and in the business, and you can kind of do anything, right? You can imagine and be creative about what's possible, which is really not possible in so many roles. But now getting into tactically, I think business development as a name often is confused with sales, and often people in various sales functions don't sometimes want to use the word sales because it comes across as salesy. It might turn off customers. They like to call themselves business development, and so there's this confusion about, well, is business development sales or is it partnerships, right? And then people try to make it more clear by using one or the other of those words.
Yeah.
My way of thinking of it is, in an early stage company, often there is no sales team. And sometimes you start off when you're like a raw startup and you have one person, and maybe that person, I think of that person as business development, and they try to figure out, how do you sell this thing? What's the business model? How do we go to market? So it's almost the go to market function often in an early company. It's often one person. And then, that person's job often is to figure out, okay, like, how do we sell this? What is our business model? And get those first customers and try to prove, kind of develop some proof points and some examples of how this company sells, and then turn it into something that is repeatable. And then you can hire a salesperson or sales team and give them some kind of templates and say, okay, we know for this vertical or this industry, this is how we sell it, who we sell it to. Here's kind of the presentations that we made for how to pitch it. This is how we go to market. And here's the economic structure and all that. And then you can bring on and build a team that I think more of it as a sales function, where they're trying to scale up and build a repeatable process that can allow them to scale. So that is one kind of function of business development, which is kind of proto sales, if you were, right? Kind of creating the environment for sales. Does that make sense, Kelly? Yep. You're on team. And then there's a very different set of functions that are more pure kind of partnerships, which is, as I was saying before, kind of product enablement, and then kind of distribution, right? There's a third type that I think about, which is kind of marketing partnerships, where it's not critical for making your product, and it's not critical for selling, and they don't provide distribution, but sometimes an association with another company can also add a lot of value, as long as that's what it is. And just to give some examples to try to make it more concrete, I'll use OQO. So my second startup. I don't know if anyone here has heard of OQO. So This is
Is it
in,
OKYO? Is that how you?
no, it's 3 letters, OQO. And doesn't exist anymore. So $85 million in venture capital later. No, so we had this idea in 2002 that people would want to put a computer in their pocket. Okay, that you'd want to have a device that was a full-fledged computer that you could fit in your back pocket with a 5-inch touch screen. You would have wireless internet connectivity. You could run all of your apps, and it would be kind of with a touch screen, be a mobile computing device. And obviously,
Like an
that
iPhone.
vision has happened, right? So we got the vision right.
Okay.
And that was the hardest part because most people thought we were crazy.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of arguments with folks, but we ended up building a real product, actually several generations, and we built a business. We actually got to 25 million a year in revenue with real hardware products, and then the iPhone came out, and we were dead. And then Google acquired 107 patents that we created, but we kind of lost the battle there. But the idea was correct. The reason I bring it up, when you think about the partnership work for a product like that, you look at those 3 types of partnerships: kind of enablement, distribution, and marketing. Okay, so for product enablement, in order for the product to exist, we needed to have very advanced microprocessor technology. We need certain chips that are not generally available in the market. And so there was work with Intel and several other semiconductor companies in order to basically build a relationship with the leadership at those companies in order to allow us to buy product from them, right? And actually we influence the roadmaps, right? And so the way that we approach that, which is I think one of these kind of lessons we can talk about, is Intel and these other semiconductor companies we worked with, they had a strategy for their kind of future, what they believed the future for mobile was going to be. And then we had to convince them that we were going to be the poster child for that. Okay. But the real lesson there is like, we couldn't, like, they weren't going to support us just because of who we were, because we were nobody at that point. But we knew that they had a strategy and we were going to be the facilitator of their strategy. So how do we help them achieve their goals? That's kind of the key to all partnerships, I believe, is figure out what the goals are of the partner company, and then how do you help them do that thing that they're trying to do that's important to them. So mobile was, something that was nascent at the time, but we were able to convince Intel, for example, to work with us. So that's one example, is kind of enablement partnership. Similarly, we needed to have, we wanted for the product to be the product we wanted. We needed to have kind of a wireless internet connection, which required a partnership with, a mobile operator. And so we had to convince Verizon and AT&T and others that we were someone that they should devote engineering effort to supporting, which was super hard to do, right? And but we couldn't build our product without it. And so these are examples of, if someone doesn't go and build that relationship and develop a partnership, then we don't have a business, we don't have a product, right? So that's enablement work. And then kind of the second category I go into before distribution is marketing. And so part of how we were able to convince a whole supply chain to work with us was that we were able to show that we were supported and endorsed by major players in the industry. So we managed to convince Bill Gates that we should be the subject of his keynote at CES, or at least show up in it. So we were able to convince Microsoft to endorse us. And there's a whole set of work involved in, like, you're, a 20-person startup that no one's heard of, and how do we convince, how do we get access to Bill Gates, right? And because we knew that he was going to be doing a keynote at CES, and how do we somehow find the team that's writing his scripts and somehow convince them that we were the thing that he needed to talk about. And so there's a lot of kind of tactics and scrappiness to making these things happen. But at the end of the day, having the screenshot of Bill Gates at CES holding our device was very important for convincing Intel or Verizon or others that we were a company that mattered, right? And so and then the partnership with Microsoft helped across their whole organization, and again, top down, showing that Bill Gates was the CEO at the time, that he was someone that endorsed us, that made it mean that Microsoft officially like sort of supported us too. And so everyone at Microsoft kind of felt like we were an important partner, even though we hadn't really done anything together besides that, right? So
That's how it starts.
yeah, that's you gotta do these things, right? And then that's kind of the marketing stuff, where there's no direct deal, there's no distribution relationship, there's nothing that Microsoft's actually doing besides giving us the endorsement that gives us the halo for others to support. And there are a bunch of other things we did like that. And then the third area of partnerships, and I'm just using the OKO example because it's so kind of clear, with distribution, where we wanted to find a way to sell the product, and we could have a website and sell it directly on our website, and we did that, but that just doesn't lead to a lot of volume. And so there were a whole set of partnerships that we did to kind of drive sales of the product, and that's much more kind of how do you take like a sales motion, but instead of having your salesperson have to go out and generate the leads, how do you find a partner that can either drive leads to you that you can close or sell on your behalf? And so those are kind of the models there at a high level. But maybe I'll pause there since I've talked a lot, and I can give more examples of other companies I've been at startups as well as at scale. But I think those are the basic categories I think of as kind of enablement, marketing, distribution.
Yeah, it's interesting you frame it like that because I had the pleasure of like doing a keynote at one of the conferences earlier this year, and we actually talked about the economics of partnerships, where we said there's a production layer, the distribution layer, and the consumption layer, and and the framework actually works pretty well based given all the different types of partnerships that we have in the market now. But when you were coming up to through all these companies, was there a playbook that you prescribed to or came up with? Like, how did you know what to do, right? Or maybe, let's start there.
Based on your facial expression, it sounds like it was a journey.
Yeah,
writing the playbook while you're in flight.
Yeah, no, you kind of make it up as you go along. Look, I think we were fortunate. I guess a few things. One is I was fortunate to have incredible kind of co-founders and collaborators, like people inside their organizations where I was. And in particular, working with technical folks who are just kind of first principle thinkers and open-minded and brilliant has been, if there's any secret to like any success that I've had, it's working with really great technical folks, right? And often and people who will push me and challenge me. And, it's often the strategies that we're talking about. It's through these discussions, mostly internally and with, the leaders and the technical folks that the ideas come up. And sometimes these folks are often primarily engineers or product designers. They'll have ideas that maybe to sort of more businessy types like me, like, oh, that's crazy. That's not how people do it. That's not how it works. Like, you don't just get Bill Gates to use you in his keynote. It's not how it happens. And sometimes those people who come at it just from a kind of blank sheet of paper and more from a pure technical sense often have these ideas that you need to really take seriously, right? And sometimes these things are possible, right? And so that's one, is just working with great folks. And then we also, having great investors and advisors did make a big impact for us. And those people often would connect us, provide the introductions that we needed, or and often we did collect a lot of angel investment across all three of my startups. There were a lot of angels who were involved who were really invaluable in kind of giving us ideas, feedback. We would bounce these ideas off them. They would introduce us to people that they knew, use their networks. And ultimately, it's a network thing where you need to find a way to get access often to, part of it's the idea, but part of it's like, how do you get to these people? And, using our kind of set of angels that were involved to help us to extend our networks, because we didn't really have networks, was the way that we kind of were able to get out there a lot. But like it's just hard. It's just ultimately it's hard work. You just need to like get out there and make things happen and
Yeah.
believe you can do it.
Well, the reason why I asked is because if we look at the distributions part of the partnership equation, there's a lot of rigor that's already in place now, right? Because channel teams have playbooks, they have a methodology, they have steps that they need to follow. But the stuff that you're talking about actually does not have a playbook, right? And that's why
Yeah.
it's called business development. And the reason why I keep coming back to this is because there's a lot of uh, folks that aspire to be in BD, but the skill set is not like you can't go to just a school or a class and stuff like that. There's like inherent things that the way that you look at life,
Yeah.
uh, and it's a way of life that you choose to go discover things that just aren't real, and you have to make something out of the and a lot of times the BD folks, I believe, end up going to become CEOs because it's the same thing as basically being a founder all the way through. If you weren't a founder of a company yourself when you took on the BD role.
Yeah. So I'll say a couple of things. So there is a need to kind of create repeatable processes in organizations, right? And you can't generally have you can't have the impact generally without finding a way to take something and repeat it. Okay. Um, there's a different kind of behavior around I'm going to do the first of a kind deal. I'm going to pioneer something new versus I'm going to follow a playbook that's been defined for me, right? Those are both very important, right? Um, and you can't just be like, hey, I'm going to be a cowboy or, go and do whatever I want. We work in organizations. The way you get impact at scale is by creating something that can be repeated typically,
and
right?
and and following it all the way through,
And
because
following it,
the
having
rigor
that
piece is
rigor,
actually super important.
yeah, having the rigor, sticking with these things, building a process for partner management, for example, where hey, it's easy to sign a piece of paper, but actually making the thing happen and driving business results is often that's where the heavy lifting is.
Yeah.
So partner management is often a lot more important than like going and driving the deal. It doesn't get the glamour always, but that's where like the impact happens, right? So, um, you know, I don't want to create the impression that it's just about hey, let's go and be really creative and come up with something new. That's really important too, but finding ways to define and templatize and structure and create process and then bring people on who can then scale that and that is critical, right? And that's not always part of your organization. And often, like in BD, like if you want to have huge teams, then BD is maybe not the role. Then sales is probably better because you can have large teams. But BD, you have to be comfortable that you're going to maybe create things and define structures and process, and then hand that over. And then part of your job is to then help to kind of create the structure for another, like do that handoff in an effective way that it then grows and scales, because that's maybe not your expertise, right? Or what BD does. And
Yeah.
then,
And just there, the transferring of the ownership, it's almost like it's your IP, but then you have to transfer the ownership. That's a step. Like it's not just an email. It's like really building the capability in the rest of the organization to take it on. There's a lift required in it. There's some resources. There's some time that's required to
yes.
pull something out of, let's call it incubation, and into the monetization phase, and and into the success phase after that, right? Because you're gonna find some early successes with a few pockets in the organization, and then it really has to scale out and become a real business, that generates cash.
Yeah, that's right. And you have to remember, it's not about like your team necessarily or like the BD team owning and driving. It's about the overall company success, right? And so often these things don't belong long term in a given part of the organization. They start somewhere and move somewhere else. And also the collaboration between BD and sales is really, really critical and often a source of conflict. And we can talk more about that. But I just think it's really important not to like think of fiefdoms and we're going to build a great BD team or something. It's really about we're going to build a successful company and we're going to help to facilitate that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is you're asking like how do you kind of how do you be successful in this, and I think the closer that you can be to product and to the technology and to the actual user experience, then the better results you're going to have. Because ultimately, kind of the ground truth, like where it happens, is the end user, whether it's a business user or a consumer, and the experience that they're having. Okay, and in order to like, if that experience isn't great or delightful, then nothing that you're doing matters. You can come up with great partnership ideas about, oh, these two big companies want to work together, or I'm going to hitch a ride on someone else. But ultimately, it's about that end user experience, right? And the business results that that drives for the customers. And so the closer that you can be to understanding that product really well, so like the deeper that you can get as an individual in the product and understanding it and understanding how it's built and being involved in like working with the engineers and spending time with the engineering team and the product folks to really understand the product better, that is how you become successful in PD, right? Is because you understand the end user experience of flows, you understand the products better, you can understand how a partner product would integrate or not, and why that would create a great experience, and that's where your source of strength comes from, right? And often the most important partnership work is going to require engineering, it's going to require product build, and then you have to be able to almost be the PM, right? You need to be able to kind of lead, hey, this is how these things are going to work together, this is how it's going to be feasible, coming up with the technical solutions, because it's not just about ideas and the business stuff and we're going to work together. It's about product and how do you build something that delivers value for end users or business customers. So I think people kind of miss out on that a lot. Is like, how do I be good at this job? Well, the more time you spend with engineering, the better you understand your products, the better you're going to do. And then I always thought of it as, well, how do you, once you're close with product and engineering and you know what the experiences that you want to deliver, then you can think about how do you work with partners and convince them of that. And you'll be a lot more compelling if you're tight with product, right? And that's why I'll often, I don't think of the role as like, hey, we're going to own this thing forever. Often it ends up, you create something and then that maybe part goes to sales. There's different ways that these things take on life over time, but your idea is your goal is to kind of create a new business, right?
I'd be interested to hear more about the philosophy that you had at LinkedIn, because I think when it comes to technology partnerships, LinkedIn is a really interesting approach. The way it's kind of conceived from the outside in the market is that um, it's been more restrictive than other social media platforms in order to preserve the quality of the user experience. So it sort
Yeah.
of had this battle solely with like I guess unapproved integrations, right? And then they like keep knocking them out, and then you find it's here another one's cropping up. But it seems guided by preserving a high quality experience for the user. But as a result, potentially having less partners. And this is something every platform has to find that balance for themselves, right? Is when they err on side of having a totally open ecosystem, but then you get in people there who are potentially spammers. So I'd just love to hear how you were thinking about this at the time.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and it's very close to my heart. So where it all starts is LinkedIn is a what we call like a members first product, members first company. So and I mentioned before that LinkedIn's is mission driven in a way that may not be obvious from the outside, but definitely when you're at LinkedIn, it is a almost evangelical approach to how do we help our members. Okay, so LinkedIn is about how do we bring economic opportunity to every member of the global workforce. That was our mission, right? We do that by connecting people, and every decision that was made in the company was around what is best for the member. And again, we call them members, not users, which was an important distinction. They're not just users; like they are members. Like the company exists for the benefit of the members of LinkedIn, and so every decision really comes down to that, and that makes it very easy to decide what's right and wrong. And we may think it's great to have lots of different people building different things, but if it's not going to drive value to the members, then it's not the right path to take. So I think that's the kind of the basic foundation where everything comes from. And then when I joined LinkedIn, we had this API program that was, in some ways an experiment. There were a lot of questions at that point in time around, was social going to be the next platform for kind of application innovation? And Facebook was had their API program. This is going way back. And we had an API program at LinkedIn where you could build products that integrated LinkedIn member data. Okay. And there were lots of people building different things. And there were a couple of things that happened. One was people would occasionally build things that actually were not in the interest of members. The LinkedIn kind of profile data and the graph, the connections between people. With that data, you can actually build all kinds of stuff, often which is not necessarily what members want or in their interest. And so that was a problem. And then the secondary issue we had was that we had certain lines of business that we were building at LinkedIn, and then you have a startup that was doing something similar in the same space because some of the ideas are pretty obvious, and then there'd be a conflict there. And we didn't want people to go out and start trying to build something using our APIs and then find out that we were building the same thing, and then they get shut down, and that would cause a lot of problems for them as teams. And we wanted to be more clear with kind of the community about what are the ways that you can work with LinkedIn that are going to be safe paths for you and that are going to be aligned with what we were trying to do. And so we did kind of, I think, two major things. One is around all of our lines of businesses, we started defining programs. And so for talent solutions, marketing solutions, sales solutions, for each kind of area on the profile, we started defining, okay, here are the programs that we are going to have to partner with you. And here's the way, like, if you are an advertiser or you're building an ad tech company, here's our kind of ads API program, right? And so that is an effort that you see in lots of companies that, generally works well, where we kind of define programs around specific kind of use cases, and then we can invite folks to kind of participate in the programs. We'd often do a beta with a small number of partners first and then open it more broadly. But they are basically curated programs around specific business goals where we can partner with you. Then the second thing that we did was take that kind of open API concept and start to kind of turn it into more of a vetted program, again, to avoid what we thought of as abuse and also to kind of avoid potential conflict. So and make sure things were kind of aligned with our members' desires. So instead of having an open program, we started reviewing applications, right? So instead of saying, hey, you can build whatever you want, we don't care, it was, if you want to build something, why don't you submit a proposal and then we'll review it. And that created an effort where we could actually review and vet concepts and then start to work with the teams and guide them and how we could best work together. And then you had a set of folks who, despite that, wanted to go out and, scrape data from LinkedIn. And this is all public information, but, there's been efforts to kind of effectively steal member data. They would scrape LinkedIn and then try to sell that. And it created a lot of problems for our members where their data would be sold. And that was something we needed to stop. And so we did a bunch of legal activities, including there was a pretty high profile case around with a company called Haiku Labs, where LinkedIn ended up prevailing ultimately, even went up to the Supreme Court, and LinkedIn ended up winning that case and demonstrated that scraping of data was not something that was going to be okay. So
right there.
Summary. Yeah.
Yeah. One of our members is Mike Vaccaro. He's with a company called Trade.io, and Mike Vaccaro had invited us to one of the racetracks. I think it's on the way from here to Monterey or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Laguna Seca, maybe.
Yeah. Laguna Seca. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm like. I go to this event and I'm just standing around. I'm like, wow, these cars are beautiful, et cetera, et cetera. This guy's sitting right next to me. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, well, my company, we got sued by LinkedIn. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, the court's in the case in the Supreme Court. I'm like, really? Like, what exactly happened? It's the founder of Haiku Labs. I was literally there. we stayed in touch with him, and he was like, "Yeah, we're fighting it, et cetera, et cetera." And I'm like, "Wow." And I'm like, "Why did LinkedIn like pick on such a small startup?" Like, and I'm sure like at that point in time, you're like, "Hey, we have to make a statement that this is not right." And uh, but it was interesting to kind of hear his version of the story as well.
Yeah,
And
it
I totally
wasn't,
agree
it
with other
wasn't
parts.
specific to them. There was a general effort to kind of shut down unauthorized access to
Yeah,
member data because it was our responsibility to ensure that members' data was being protected and
yeah,
people were.
I ended up building, participating in building a data company and learning about the world of scraping. Like, I mean, this is like a whole new world of people that are just like experts at scraping. Because like scraping is one thing, but then you actually have to make sense of the data. So you actually do need to do a lot of things to the data to actually make it useful. But also the websites now have something that they put in the robots.txt file that just says don't do it, and then you just don't do it. And there's ethical ways to do it too. But yeah, I mean, it's a very fascinating journey, just understanding how third party data is actually collected, and the ethics around it was a very interesting journey to go through while building a data company.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and it's interesting even now with AI, those topics are
Yeah.
coming back up again, right?
So just taking shifting gears a little bit, right? In terms of just modern partnerships, right? And so we have a uh, uh, stuff happening in the marketplace, right? Where companies are now saying we need to bring these partner teams together, right?
Yeah.
And they want the production of the partnerships function and the distribution of the partnerships function both to live together under a role called the chief partner officer, right? And so I wanted to get your thoughts, because even when we were chatting earlier, when we got reconnected. By the way, for folks that are listening, like I think I met Bob like 14 years ago, and then through another friend, I guess who's a PL member, we got reacquainted again. And I was like, man, we need to have you on the podcast. But even in that conversation, as we were chatting, uh, you had talked a little bit about the chief business officer role,
Yeah.
and I'm tracking both chief partner officers and chief business officers, and today there's about 872 chief partner officers, but there's 8,700 chief business officers, right? And one of the things that actually came up even yesterday in a webinar that I was doing is, so yes, we are in partnerships, but then what happens after that, right? And I always say that the most successful partner folks who actually understand the three different layers of partnerships, because actually can go become CEOs, because Tony Bates did it, like Bernie Brenner did it. There's a number of the Looker CEO also did it. He was a BD person, right? Like there was a number of people that were successful at business development, not just
Mhm.
channel partnerships, but business development, that actually then went and became founders.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe just to take that apart, I think there's a kind of career uh, path discussion around what are the careers in BD partnerships. Where does that go? Where do you go as a career in your career? And then there's an organizational design question around, like how are companies thinking about this function, right?
Yep.
And where is that going? So on the former, in terms of careers, part of what's interesting, what I was loved about the role was the people that you find in partnerships in BD tend to be really kind of broad, creative people who, like I was saying, can understand both product and business, right? And that intersection between technology and kind of the end users and how does that turn into an actual company and a business? That's kind of where it all happens, right? So I always enjoyed the people always seem to be interesting people in terms of their skills and capabilities, right? And what that means is that often people who spend some time in their career in partnerships or BD can end up in lots of different places, right? So, and I would see that sometimes people would be like, I really love product, and I'm in BD now, but my goal would be that I want to become a product manager, and so we see people go to become PMs, right? You could also see people where they're really interested in kind of organization, like they want to manage people. They want to be closer to the customer, or they want to be closer to like the dollars and the revenue. And for them, moving into the sales side is going to be better opportunity for them for growth, right? And then you also had people who want to be like a GM, right, which is a very common thing. Um, it's I think often a kind of a false path, if you will. There isn't really, like, most companies don't really, like, there isn't really a GM role. Like, some companies will use that name, but saying you want to be a GM is kind of hard, especially from an area like BD, because really what is a general manager? A general manager is a product leader who also is responsible for the P&L, right? And so really the GM typically is going to come through product, or maybe it comes through sales, but it's usually one of those. It's pretty rare, and a lot of companies don't even have GMs as a structure. So it's not a. I don't think it's great to have it that as kind of your kind of goal. I'm going to go directly into that. It's usually going to be through product or sales. And then people who stay in BD for a long time, then you basically you want to learn the various aspects of the craft, as it were, right? So there's from kind of deal initiation, how do you kind of getting good at doing deals, because deals are obviously part of it, but then, like I was saying before, being able to turn the kind of a deal into a reality, and what people call partner management is actually where a lot of the work happens. And I think it's important to understand the whole life cycle. And people who are very focused on one element or the other, you're not seeing the whole picture. So you got to be able to do the whole life cycle, right? And then just the other piece of that in terms of kind of career, like there's a couple pieces. One is, it's great to be able to do things at scale and build scale programs, but you also have to be able, as an individual, to be able to do the work yourself too. And so a lot of people want to be managers and are very interested in like leading. And people management is an important part of it, and learning how to manage and develop people and recruit and retain and kind of see people develop in your organizations is a really important part of becoming a leader. But you still need to be able to kind of have your feet on the ground. And even when you're the VP or you're the leader, there are moments where you need to be the person out there who's doing the deal, right? It's not just a people job. So I think that's something that is a little bit of a trap that people fall into. Oh, I'm senior now, I'm not going to do the work. It's like, no, you actually, you need to get out there too, right? And be able to drive stuff. So that's kind of, in the role, like, I think the opportunity in partnerships is for like, as you kind of develop in your career, is to have more and more impact across your organization. And this idea that your role is kind of not just to be the interface with the ecosystem, but to actually create business, I think it's a very different mindset, right? And so when you go into, if you're in the BD role and you think of yourself as if you're a founder of the company, you think of yourself as a business owner, and how do we create a business here and use the ecosystem to do that. That I think is where you can have a tremendous amount of impact, right? And then, from the org design standpoint, it's so dependent on the nature of the business of the company, right? So, some companies have a direct sales model to enterprise, and then partnerships is a very specific function. Some companies, don't have a sales team, and the BD team is the kind of distribution part of the organization and drives the revenue. So it does vary a lot depending on the nature of the company. The chief business officer kind of nomenclature is fairly recent, I believe. It goes along with, there's a chief revenue officer concept as well now. And, where does BD fit into the organization? It can be fairly fluid, again, depending on the nature of the business and on the people. Sometimes it makes sense for partnerships or BD to be kind of subservient or part of the sales effort under a CRO. I think more commonly in technology companies, I think of it more as a product function. And I brought this up earlier, where I've seen BD or partnerships have probably the most impact is where it's really part of the product team. And this is LinkedIn's a good example of this, where BD sat in the product leadership group, every product review, every strategy review, there'd be a representative from the business development team involved. And so that meant as the company is kind of, creating new products and as a product manager thinking about what they're building, they're getting input from someone who's kind of the businessy type and who can think about how you're going to go to market with it, can think about who the partners are you're going to need, and considerations about what's happening in the business world. And I always thought that was an important part of the function.
It's
So,
really interesting. We, Asher and I just did a study of the top 50 application companies, so software companies by revenue,
yeah,
and very few were reporting up to product. Now, we were not looking at BD, we were looking at tech partnerships, solutions partners, agencies, resellers, so all
sure.
those type of partnerships, and very few reported to product. Most reported up to either CRO is the most common, but head of sales
Yeah,
could be a president, could be something, but it's more businessy. So it is really interesting,
yeah,
and because I think either way that line of communication has to exist, right, between anything related to technology partnerships or business development. But it is interesting that it's not the current market trend. And I will say I work at HubSpot, and our technology partnerships and our strategic alliances, we report to product. So we were one of the few on the list that that went in a different direction. But I do think it's an interesting.
yeah. I mean, there's not a single answer. It does depend on the specifics of the company. What I would say is that, in my experience, often the partnership work that has the most impact is not going to use some off-the-shelf product that exists already. You're going to have to build something, okay? And in order to build something, you need engineering and product, right? And so, to the extent that those organizations don't talk to each other, or the communication is only at the top, then it makes it very hard to do anything that's going to have real impact. And so, I always found that whether organizationally you're reporting a product or not, kind of your ability to have impact in partnerships is going to require very, very close alignment with what the product team and engineering team is thinking, right? It doesn't matter that you report to them, although that often makes it easier to be in the same room because you're at the offsites together, you're kind of working together on the plans before they're presented. But you need to have those relationships with the product organization if you're going to build something that doesn't exist today. And how do you develop business if you're not creating something new, right? So again, many of the functions that you mentioned, hey, we're going to work with agencies, or we're going to work with SIs, or we're going to do some of these things that are more kind of field oriented. You do need to be closely aligned with the sales organization, because a lot of the day-to-day kind of customer facing kind of work is going to require working with the sales team. And so I've seen that happen a lot, where those functions are part of sales, but you also don't want to shard out the BD team into too many different places. I think having a single strong BD team is often the right answer.
Yeah. Well, as you have, I mean, maybe looked at a bunch of like chief business officer roles, right? At least the ones that I've looked at, they all have strategic partnerships as a component, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they also have platform as a component to their roles. Interestingly,
Mm-hmm.
And they're very like they're much more on the product side, as you're saying, than on just the distribution, because they look at like distribution as just a function of sales, and they're like, well, we'll figure it out, but we need the components of what we're going to go sell built properly. And so they sit on this side, and so would it be fair to say that a chief business officer role is more about just building the business? I'm just trying to get to a construct of like, well, how do you think about that role?
So there's several reasons why I like the chief business officer construct. Why I think it's good. One is just starting with kind of the partnership effort and the platform that you talked about, where often what the platform, or kind of APIs and how the programs that you have there, needs to be very closely aligned with how the structured programs that you have. And I think that's all should all be of one piece. How you're working with the platform and what you're building, and how you're working with your most strategic partners, and then how you're building structured programs in the middle. That all needs to fit together, right? So that's one, right? I think number two is having the C level title kind of indicates that this is that person's a member of the leadership team in an
Yeah,
organization and
it's a
feels the role.
serious function. Yeah.
Yeah, and that allows the function to kind of have more impact naturally,
Yeah.
right? And then the third thing that I like about it is that by calling a chief business officer, it's clear that this person's job is to build a business. It's not whether it takes partners or whether it's building, sometimes the right answer is to partner. Sometimes the right answer is not to partner. Sometimes the right answer is to create a brand new product area that didn't exist before. Sometimes you want to do an acquisition. There's all kinds of things that you can do in the business. And so giving someone that's on the leadership team the remit that your goal is to build the business makes it much more broad than, oh, your goal is to go and do alliances. It's a different, it's a different thought
It's
process.
Yeah, it's very interesting you're saying, and as always, we're going to run out of time. But let's finish this topic and maybe go over time a little bit. Yeah, the as we and on the partnership leader side, like we did a state of partnerships leaders report, which is about to come out, and it talks a little bit about the career aspects of this partner leaders. But we also did the chief partnership officer report because we felt that there was a need for a descriptive piece of content out there that just explained what's happening in the marketplace, right? And where we landed with that was that if you want to have the C title before your or C chief before your title, or versus after, which is what a lot of channel chiefs do, right? That the conversation that you have needs to be a business conversation, and you either need to participate in a meaningful way in the buy build partner conversation, or you should lead it, right? Uh, and it feels like it is clearly by the data shows that there's just a number of chief business officers out there that are working on this type of stuff. They're actually leading the conversation around what is it going to take for the business now to grow versus just for the partnerships, because it's almost like the business has its own dilemma of like, how do I grow profitably now, right? Or just grow in general. And partnerships has their own dilemma, which is like, well, one half of my function is here and the other half is here, but I need them to come together because there is a little bit of pressure on technology partnerships teams to go figure out how to monetize their work, versus the reseller house of the world, reseller side of the house, where you're just figuring out new ways to distribute the product that already exists, right? And so there are two distinct problems, I would say, in the market that companies are facing right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And the part of, I think, chief business officer notion is that corp dev and BD are probably both under that same person. Yep. And those are very different functions. But this idea of buy versus build versus partner, you want to make the right decision for the company, right? And I think it's dangerous if you think, oh, my job is to do partnerships and we're just going to do partnerships all the time, and like that hammer isn't always the right answer. And so, and I think part of how you kind of have impact, obviously, is by making the right choice there, and then showing it's not about, oh, my team is partnerships, so I need to do more partnerships. It's about figuring out what the right answer is for the company and for the business, right? And it may be that you should acquire something, and maybe that you should just build and not partner, and that's fine. In fact, that's often the right answer. And going in saying, oh, we need to partner, and we need to, no matter what, find a way to like do these deals, that's often not the right thing for the company.
Yeah, no, totally. I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I've come to the realization that the chief partner officer, as if is a member of the C-suite, needs to really be the person that prioritizes relationships or prioritizes partnerships, because you can't just willy-nilly go out and partner, because, as you said, there's so much tax that the business incurs above and beyond the technical debt and all these other things that it's already incurring as it's growing. But it's almost like, if you look at the two roles that are out in the marketplace between the chief partner office and the chief business officer, there's a little bit of or at least as I see it, will be a little bit of an overlap, and we'll see where the market takes this function. But there's definitely buy, build, partner skill set that's needed, which again brings me back to this other interesting point where a lot of the CPOs, at least the ones that I interviewed or that I spoke with, 30% of them have never done partnerships. But
Yeah.
what they are is they have either management consulting or technology consulting background. So they're actually working on the business problems. And they're like, oh, yeah, if we're going to partner, we may actually just leverage our partnerships muscle. Otherwise, we're just going to go do what's already working and do more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, chief business officer is such a broad
It's so
remit.
broad. Well,
Yeah.
some of them owns direct sales too. Like you see chief business officers owning direct sales at the same time, and that's a huge scope at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah,
think
well,
it's
I
just
guess we're,
TBD.
we're to conclude it. To me, it's like the partnership leaders that are in the market today have an opportunity to elevate themselves by understanding business problems and focusing
Yes.
on how to grow the business. And I know it all comes down to like revenue, but actually growing the business also involves like unlocking hidden opportunity in the marketplace, and they should keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
At
And
least
maybe
in my
just to
opinion.
kind of bring it back to where we started. So, um, really, it's whatever you call it, it's about building the business. It's not about doing partnerships, right? Partnerships is a means to an end. And, but the goal is to, how do you create new businesses? How do you build a business? How do you have impact on your end users that makes it a better product, right? That delivers better experiences for your customers. And so that's really what matters. And partnerships are a great way to do that. But your goal, whether you're in partnerships or you're a chief business officer, is to develop the business.
Yeah, it's an important and different framing, right? Because you're going to get different outcomes and drive efficiency, which is another way, huge help for partners. And that's what you see a lot is people focusing on the first, right? My job is to partner, to run the partnerships versus thinking the next level up and then driving it that way where you're going to get better outcomes.
Yeah, agree.
Okay. I know we're on time. I totally appreciate you, Bob, spending some time. That we'll circle back. Definitely wanted to get you on the podcast to just have our listeners to understand your journey, which is incredible, and you've done a lot just to kind of like share and help other partner leaders out in the marketplace. So we'll be in touch. We'll bring you back on. But thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.